Welcome to Freedom of Thought, a podcast by Humanist International, with me, Leon Langdon.
And me, Gary McClelland.
Each week, we'll be discussing news, research, policy developments, and campaigns related to freedom of thought around the world. And this week, our guest in the second half of this episode will be Niamh Clowry, the Operations Manager of Humanist Association of Ireland. But in the meantime, Gary, you have been fierce busy, as always, I'll add, working on the Congress, which I don't mean to terrify you, but I think is only about 3 weeks away.
That's right, yeah. Very exciting. I mean, yes, it's been very busy. There's been obviously a lot of communication with our members about the General Assembly, our board elections, our policy resolutions and so on. Very important sort of weighty issues of policy. But also this week in particular, we have quite a lot of tight deadlines on some of the particulars. So we need to get things to the printers so they can be delivered to Ottawa on time. So it's really ranging from very big strategic questions to little fiddly bits that need to all be done in time to make sure they're waiting for us in Ottawa.
I think we might have talked about this in season 1 when it came to the Freedom of Thought report, but I think there's such a tension at times between how big and global we are and how just like small picture we have to be sometimes. Like when it came to the Freedom of Thought reports, it was like literally sitting at the table I'm currently filming at, me and you, Gary, just like stuffing envelopes. It's about printing stuff. Like I think there's, it would be great to be leading advocacy and just to be focusing on the big picture or however you want to put it. But I do think so often both of us and every member of the team are really kind of bedding in across so many different jobs. And I think it is, we're bigger than some of our members, we're smaller than some of our members, but I think it's quite fun in a lot of ways, but it is also a lot more work in so many ways.
Yeah, I mean, it's the benefit and the downside of being a small team is that we all, I think, work very hard, work very well together, but it means that at times like this, when you have a sort of confluence of deadlines, it's kind of all hands on to just make sure that we get things to the printer, that we get all the designs done in time and pick up all the bits and bobs that need to be done. So yeah, it's going to be a busy week, as it always seems to be these days. But in particular, Leon, we had some good news from you this morning that you will be definitely joining us in Ottawa, because there was a bit of a doubt for a week or so. Maybe you want to tell our listeners what happened?
This is fierce embarrassing. But it was a bit touch and go there for a few days. I had a lovely bit of annual leave, headed over to Portugal for a couple of days, and somehow lost my passport. Had to fly home on what I can only describe as a blue piece of paper. And then very, very kindly, the Irish Embassy not only have an embassy in London, but they also have a passport office, which means you can get a passport in a mere 4 or 5 days. Now, you do have to pay for the privilege, but it means I will be in Ottawa, which I'm delighted about. I'm getting in a little bit of travel beforehand, out to visit some members as well, across Europe. And most importantly, I will be in Ottawa, which is a bit of a relief, because there was a hot sec there where I was a bit worried about it.
Yeah, that is a relief. I'm very, very glad you managed to get that sorted as quickly as possible. That would have been very difficult if you weren't able to join us in Ottawa.
No, and I am very excited for the Congress. And, I think we've obviously just moved from this, having the Congress every 3 years. Some people might know, members should know, but for other listeners, every year we have our General Assembly. It's the sort of AGM of the organisation, the legal business meeting, approval of accounts and all the rest. We will have an episode at some point this season sort of talking through that, both for those of you inside the organisations, but also for those who might be looking at becoming part of it. But we've moved to this model now where we have a bigger World Humanist Congress every 3 years, which it really amps up the stakes. It means it's more printing, like you just said, Gary, but it's also just more important for us all to be there. There's more work to be done and all the rest. But I was thinking about kind of the next couple of years of Congresses, and I realized next year will be, if I'm not mistaken, if my maths is correct, is the 75th year of Humanist International. So are we doing anything to mark that? Are we going to have like a special Congress? This is me live asking Gary for the record.
It's a good question. I mean, it's a very active discussion right now with some of our members and the board and the staff, and
not one I'm involved in.
Well, actually, one of the conversations I've been having with our President Emeritus and current Ambassador Andrew Copson is about, In 2002, a book was published about, this was the 50th anniversary of what was then IHEU. A book was published by the then chief executive, Babu Goggeneni, and an archivist, a humanist archivist, Bert Gassenbeek from the Netherlands, who was at that point in charge of our archives going back to the formation in 1952. And they published a book and basically going over the history of Humanist International development, the tensions that existed between what our role is and what our members' role is, and all the, the historical information about our finances and our advocacy at the United Nations and so on. The interesting thing reading that book is how much of the tensions and the commentary and the opportunities and threats and so on are current at the moment. Some of those things seem to be kind of omnipresent questions for the organisation. But one of the conversations Andrew and I have been having is about trying to redo that book as a collection of essays and inputs from different members around the world and different leaders. So there's a kind of ongoing conversation about that, about an additional supplement to that historical book, looking at Humanist International at its 75th birthday. And of course, there's going to be hopefully some other opportunities to dig into our archives and get out some of the historical artifacts to celebrate them. But also I think it's a good thing to say to our members, if you have any ideas or suggestions about how we can celebrate this important milestone, do get in touch.
I love that 50-year anniversary book because it makes me feel so much better about times I've messed up. My favorite sort of early International Humanist and Ethical Union fact is that having been founded in 1952, one of the first resolutions was to become, it was to seek consultative status with UNESCO. There's this feeling that UNESCO is this sort of international body, kind of a part of the UN alongside it. Serving sort of the rights of the non-religious, cultural rights, science and rationality. I think we've talked before how, early humanists were massively involved in UNESCO.
Well, the first chairman of the Humanist International Congress in 1952 founded UNESCO, Julian Huxley.
Yeah, it was the first director. Yeah, Julian Huxley was the first director general of UNESCO. And so even with that context of how close they were, and again, one of the first resolutions being to become a sort of partner of UNESCO, it took like 6 years, I think, because they kept like filing the wrong forms and like sending it to the wrong people and not sending it on time. And like they just kept messing up. And honestly, it makes me feel so much better because we're only human. We make mistakes. And sometimes, I have the real privilege of leading advocacy of this organization now, but I don't always get things right. Deadlines are missed, work. There's sometimes just too much to do, and things do get dropped sometimes, but it actually makes me feel so much better reading that book and being like, wow, people 70 odd years ago who had the foresight and the wherewithal to create this organization had similar flaws of being human, I guess, which is really nice.
It's an amazing book. We've got it published on the website, so actually we'll ask James to put a link in the show notes. But thinking about that, I guess stepping back and thinking about our advocacy work historically and the UN and everything, I know that you've been doing a lot of work recently with me and with the board and with other members of staff, kind of reviewing where our strategy, where our work with advocacy is at and where we're going and so on. So maybe tell us a little bit about that process.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for those who don't know, I've stepped into the position of leading our advocacy for coming up on a year now. I think as you mentioned, Gary, there are many tensions in our work. We are the global representative body of humanist organizations around the world. Do we sort of lead them or do we sort of raise their voices? Do we do both of those things at the same time? How does that work? What does that mean for countries that we don't have members in, which, is often because the policies there are particularly, repressive against the non-religious? How do we interact with that? How does that serve our members? Is that kind of what we should still be doing? We think about places like Iran, Afghanistan, where we don't have members, but obviously have a big interest, for lack of a better word. And there are all these tensions that have sort of been teased out over the years, but it's been a while since we've had a full sort of consolidation of all of those things. And, I think it's important for us to kind of, take a step back and sort of figure out where we are and why exactly we've been doing. The nature of our work is it can be quite reactive at times. We're trying to react to whether it's anti-rights actors, the rise of Christian nationalism, whether we're trying to react to kind of immediate, policy by, for example, the Trump administration. I think about Iran again, when everything kicked off in February, we got a statement out very quickly. There's so many things that we need to hold all at the same time. I'm very grateful for this opportunity and this sort of push from the board to really kind of delve into that. And I know you and I have been working very closely on that. I've been working with my team on it, and big thanks to them for their input, as well as other staff members, who've been there longer than me or who have experience from other organizations. I think it's, reviewing where we are at and where we think we should be going, what we think the board should be asking us to do, I guess, in many ways, and sort of creating that feedback loop. But also I'm conscious that, for many of our members, international advocacy is of huge importance. So, I would say email me. I'll make sure that's in the show notes too. But also for those of you lucky enough to be coming to Ottawa in like we just said, a few short weeks, please come up to me, chat to me. I'll be around, and I'm really open to hearing. Not open's not even wrong. Open's not even the right word. I'm really kind of inviting you all, anyone who's in Ottawa, to come up to me, to talk to me, to tell me what you think we should be doing, where you think we should be going, because, this is a democratic organization, and we are, answerable to the board, but to our members ultimately, and we want to make sure that we're centering members. I remember at the start of last year, Gary, you coined the phrase, maybe it was before that, but I only sort of internalized it since then, which is members are at the heart of all we do. And I think remembering that and really centering that as much as possible is I think the best thing about this job personally.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm just very glad that our members will have that opportunity now that you have your renewed passport.
Yeah, it was, like I said, a bit touch and go.
So I think that's a good spot to introduce our guest for the week. Our guest is Niamh from the Humanist Association of Ireland. The Humanist Association of Ireland is a charity and community of people who believe in humanist principles and aspire to a fair, balanced, ethical and responsible secular society, with a mission to promote humanism as a practical way of living and a guiding framework for society as a whole. More formally, HAI advocates for the equal treatment by the state of the non-religious with the religious, the abolition of religious privileges, and the separation of church and state. HAI is a member of Humanists International, and today we are delighted to be joined by HAI Operations Manager, Niamh Clowry.
Thanks so much for joining us today, Niamh, and great for me to have another Irish person on the podcast. Now, to be fair, Gary does have an Irish passport, and he likes to remind me of that. So this is the first time 3 people with Irish passports on the podcast, so I'm delighted. But no, thanks so much for joining us today, Niamh. Usually we kind of start with, I guess, an easy enough question, and one I'm sure our audience would love to hear, which is how did you come to humanism? How did you kind of figure out that you were humanist?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I get asked this question a lot, of different things. And being Irish, obviously, I was very much brought up in that whole Catholic tradition. I went to convent primary school. I went to convent Catholic school. My parents were not overtly religious, but it was kind of like the traditional. Everybody else was doing it. It was the only, it was the only option for kids in the 80s, particularly. Giving my age away now, but a child of the 80s. And I suppose I never had a very strong affinity with Catholicism. It was just always there. I went through the motions. And I think as I probably entered my teenage years, I started to question a little bit. And I have to say my mom was always great about allowing for those questions and not forcing religion. And I mean, she's a wonderful saying. She used to say, she used to find religion was whatever gets you through. And that I always kind of liked that, it was that whole thing of, well, if it gets you through something, that's fine. But I think as I got older, I wasn't a card carrying member of the Catholic Church by any means. I wasn't going to mass or anything like that, but it was just it was always there. I didn't really question too much about it. Just kind of, we might go to funerals. I didn't, maybe at Christmas the odd time might go to, but other than that, I wasn't someone who was going to church or having any real kind of faith. And then I think it would have been around kind of the pandemic time, I think. Maybe a bit more time on my hands, and I had moved home from being in Dublin for many years. And I don't know, I kind of started to think about things a little bit more and, where my place is in the world and what I want my life to be. And then I got pregnant, and we were pregnant with twins. And our son, he had a life-limiting condition, which was diagnosed during the pregnancy. So we knew that he was unlikely that he would survive the pregnancy. Now he actually did. And we got to meet him, and he survived for 25 hours, which was something that we didn't expect. And our daughter was absolutely fine. She was born healthy. Everything was fine. And that was really the turning point. And I think sometimes when you speak to people, often it can be something major in your life that can either bring you closer to religion or bring you away from religion or bring you to something else. And I think that was really, for me personally, when I started to really look into humanism a little bit more. And I've always been interested in human rights. I've worked in human rights for years. And I feel very strongly about, the autonomy of a person to choose to live their life as they see fit, and I suppose away from religion. So that was really, I think, the point when I wanted something different, and I wanted to explore what humanism would mean to me. And so I started to do that, and I suppose I started to look into it a little bit more. And that is how I fell upon the HAI. And it was when I was on my second pregnancy that was on maternity leave, and I saw a job was advertised, and I thought, well, this is the stars aligning for me. And was lucky enough I initially joined the HAI as company secretary and administrator. And then last year I was appointed as the operations manager. So I've actually only been with the Humanist Association for 2 years. It's just gone 2 years now. Joined in 2024, and I have to say it's been life-changing for me in terms of my own my personal beliefs and what I want from my life and from my children as they grow older as well. So it's just everything kind of worked out really well together. So I suppose maybe sometimes a sad situation, I was able to maybe turn it, and I think it actually has really helped me as a person to cope with what happened to us as well, without sounding too morbid about it, because grief can be a really difficult thing on people, but actually having a network of people who think like you and who are open to your views as well is really, really important. So yeah.
Thanks, Niamh. That's really touching to hear. I'm thinking as well, Leon mentioned I have an Irish passport. My grandparents came over from Ireland to Scotland. I don't know when that would have been, but a long time ago. And I guess, I've been backwards and forwards to Ireland over the years, but I guess my kind of historical thought about Ireland comes from that time, from the stories and the traditions and things that my grandparents brought over, which feels like a very different Ireland to the one that exists today. It's an Ireland of kind of people's memories, and maybe few people's memories now, actually. But Ireland seems like a country which has changed a lot socially over the recent years. Maybe you could just tell us a bit about, your thoughts on that and how HAI has navigated that.
Yeah, I think that you can see it in, I suppose if you look at the political landscape particularly probably in the last 15 to 20 years, and obviously we've had a lot of referendums, and we've, repeal the eighth and marriage equality and numerous others. And that was a huge societal shift, I think. And there was a lot of amazing people who campaigned, and people who had been campaigning for years. But a lot of that, it's quite interesting because I think some of those referendums, the change came about as people maybe moved a little bit more away from the traditional religious model that we would have in this country. We have long been defined, as a very Catholic country. And I think the more you look at it, and it's like we have a census campaign coming up next year, and in the last census campaign, we campaigned on having people tick no religion if they didn't have any religious affiliation with any particular religion. And the results were really interesting because it showed an increase in people actually saying, I don't actually have any religion. I don't want to be, considered a number. And I think that from my point of view, as a mother of 2 young children as well, I see that. I see the difference in what it's going to be like for them versus what I don't consider myself old. I'm 42, but the way I grew up, what was expected maybe of my generation is very, very different. Now, it's also, by the way, not all change is good. And I think that we do have problems. We have problems in Ireland, and actually you can see it globally, but definitely I would have a fear at the moment about kind of how people can express themselves as well, because sometimes actually you're nearly afraid to have an opinion on something these days because you can be vilified for it. It's great, everybody has an opinion, but there's no safe spaces anymore. I feel like the safe spaces to have conversations, almost like what we're having now, those safe spaces are actually starting to become far less and less. So that's maybe not a great thing about what's happening in Ireland either. And there's a lot of hatred around, and there's a lot of kind of misunderstanding. And obviously we all know about like how misogyny represents itself in throughout the world. We see it with leaders of free thinking countries. Not saying that we have necessarily that problem here, but there's always a fear of, what the political landscape could become. But I think in general as a country, we are far more open than we would have been 10, 15 years ago. I yesterday, just as an example, I was at a National Day of Commemoration event in Dublin, which was lovely, and they invite all of the different faith and non-faith groups to, be represented. So it's always nice to be represented. And when I got home to Carlow, after being in Dublin for the day, the Pride Parade was on, and I just thought it's lovely to see the acceptance. I think is so important, because we didn't always have that in this country at all. So to come so far in such a short time is amazing. I mean, I love being Irish. I'm very proud to be Irish. I think we have a great country. But, we also have challenges. Of course we do.
And thinking about the kind of social changes that you mentioned, I mean, it's something which HAI has evolved, in recent years to be able to provide services and to give that kind of existential hope and care to non-religious people that you spoke about. Can you tell us just a bit about what HAI does in order to help the kind of growing number of humanists in Ireland to access that?
Yeah, I suppose because we were a membership organisation for a long time. A lot of our work would have been on campaigning. In the early years, and for equality for the non-religious as well as for the religious. And we were very lucky. I think we're very lucky in that we, in 2012, we can legally solemnize marriages, and actually being able to do that, it's a really interesting one, because obviously our celebrants, and we have just under 60 celebrants, they provide, all different kinds of ceremonies to mark life's events. So you have your naming, milestone ceremonies, coming of age, funerals, obviously memorial events and things. But actually being able to have weddings was giving people who didn't want to have a religious wedding or a civil wedding a choice in having something else. And I think by virtue of, because it's a legally binding contract, so the statistics are kept on it, which would be a little bit different than, for some of the other ceremonies, we can see then the trends, and we can see how people really wanted the alternative and wanted to be able to have, a secular option. So that's been really good for us, because what we're trying and what we want to do as an organisation is, make sure that those people know that we're here to represent them, on other issues and other campaigns that they might, feel, if they're of, no religion, that they have a voice, they have representation. But like, as I said, being at that event yesterday, I'm there to represent the people who don't have a religion, but at the same time, they still want representation at an event like that. And I think it's great that we are included. It's definitely within the current government, we are always included in things like that. We were included in the presidential inauguration last November. That's really positive, because it shows not all policy is going the way that we want it, but it shows at least that they are accepting of the fact that we should be there. So now it's about moving the dial further and looking at, particularly around education, creating a more secular education system so that people who do not want their children to have to go to be part of faith formation schools have an option. And we've a lot to do on that, but things are certainly changing. And I think as society changes and more people express an interest in having alternative education options, we might see more progress on that as things go forward as well. So that's one of our key areas. Obviously, much like Humanist UK and our friends in Scotland, like we're trying to campaign on, voluntary assisted dying. Now, unfortunately, I don't know if anything is going to happen in the lifetime of our current government, but that's something that we feel very strongly about. So we would advocate on, human rights issues for people as well. And I think we always say, no, there's nothing. We try and create an open atmosphere for our members and supporters, that they can come to us if they feel there's a particular issue that they want us to campaign on. It doesn't have to be, you might go onto our website and look at our advocacy and say, oh, they're not doing X, Y, or Z. But we want to create an atmosphere where people can actually say, I'd like you to take this and I'd like you to take this on and see, can we move this further? So that's something that we're trying to do as well.
That's great. And I know even in the recent, say, 10 years or so, that the number of weddings that AHI is conducting is, I think, more than doubled, you know. And I remember from my own experience in Scotland, that this is such an amazing transformational thing to be able to do to help people celebrate, you know, one of the happiest days of their lives. And I know as well that HAI is active with other members of Humanists International in Europe through the EHSN partnership. One of the things that we were talking to EHSN about was a growing movement in Europe to the provision of existential care, chaplaincy, and that type of model. Is that something that HAI is exploring?
Yeah, it's actually interesting that you ask. So we're coming to the end of our current strategic plan, and it was actually it's probably the only item in the current existing plan that is kind of finishing up this year that really we haven't moved on. You know, we had it included. So we've actually had a lot of discussions around it recently, because we used to have quite an active group, and I used to work a lot with Humanist UK. Actually, we, you know, a lot of our original training programs and everything would have come from Humanist UK. So we learned an awful lot from them over the years and been a great support for resources and different things. But it has started to, it's definitely an area that we want to develop more, because we are starting to see an increase in funerals as well, which was something that we kind of expected it would happen over time. It was going to take longer for that kind of to catch on, for people to actually feel that they have an alternative. And you know, anyone who's familiar with Ireland, sometimes, particularly when it comes to a funeral, often people can choose the path of least resistance. So while they might not necessarily want a humanist funeral, not want a religious funeral, they might then turn around and actually have a religious funeral because it's just easier. It's, you know, everything is already there. Whereas we're trying to show people that they have the alternative option. So we are starting to see an increase there. And I think with that, we also have to look at, you know, what kind of pastoral care we're providing to people. Now, in fairness, for example, in prisons, in hospices, there is a kind of a disciplinary model in general in most places, but just perhaps not, there's no single humanist provider as such. So we don't want to develop something, you know, from scratch, but we'd like to work more with the different organizations to make sure that the option is there for people. And some of our celebrants, you know, would, particularly in kind of local areas, would know some of the healthcare providers, some of the people who work in hospices, and they might get a phone call, someone say, could you just come in and, you know, visit someone? So I suppose it's being done on a case by case basis, but we would like to develop it more, because it's definitely an area that we obviously identified 2 or 3 years ago. We did our last strategic plan. But look, we've had a lot of changes in the organisation in recent years too. So it's definitely on the agenda for the next plan, I think. And I think learning from our European partners will be really helpful in that, because there's a lot of people have done a lot of great work. So it makes it a little bit easier for us to develop something when we can look at the learnings from elsewhere.
I think that's really interesting. Even I think my first ever exposure to humanism was in Ireland, obviously, and was a humanist funeral. The mother of one friend away, and had a humanist celebrant come. I think, you know, one thing I'm kind of picking up on throughout everything you're talking about is the increasing visibility of humanism in Ireland. You know, through, you know, my first 2 referenda that I voted in were to repeal blasphemy and to repeal the 8th Amendment, which was the constitutional bar on abortion in Ireland. And, you know, Humanist Association of Ireland, as you mentioned, was really quite, you know, instrumental and visible throughout those times. How do you feel about, kind of, as you picked up a minute ago, kind of both being involved in services and I guess doing that kind of, you know, training people and having people kind of really be involved on a one-to-one basis, but also then to do this sort of bigger picture campaigning, and how do you see those two sides sort of complementing each other, or I guess challenges within that?
Yeah, I suppose we're very lucky, you know, in terms of how the organisation was able to evolve, and with our celebrants, obviously, like with the way that the celebrant network is set up, and obviously, as I said, just under 60 celebrants. So they most of when people are looking to book any of the ceremonies, they kind of deal directly, they come through us, but they deal directly then with the celebrant. So we're lucky from that point of view in that we don't have to necessarily look after that aspect of, so that doesn't take up a huge amount of our time or resources, because everything goes directly to celebrants who then manage all of that side of things themselves. When we're there to support, which is as much as we can, particularly, and I think around funerals, we might get the calls to kind of, help someone find a celebrant for a funeral, or advanced planning, which has become a really interesting departure for us in recent years, and definitely seeing more of that, people actually wanting to speak to somebody, as they might be in very good health, but they might be just kind of starting to forward plan. And I love that we can do that, and our celebrants are always open to having those conversations with people, which is great, because I think that really helps, and they might get to know someone, because again, it's like that traditional model that people would have had where, they might know the local priest or the local, whoever it might be, the local clergy person, whereas at least they know if there's a humanist in their community or a humanist celebrant, that they have someone that they can talk to and kind of, give their views on what they would like. And then when it comes to the campaigning, I suppose, again, we have a lot of members, and a lot of our members, they would volunteer with various campaigns. We're lucky with the census campaign. We have another one coming up now next year, where we'll be calling on our members again, because we're a small team. There's only 3 of us. 3 women, myself, Sinead and Megan, and obviously then we have all of our volunteers and our board. But there's a lot of work to do to promote humanism. I would say that we haven't even scratched the surface in terms of what we want to do in Ireland. We're out there, but we could be out there more, for sure. We want to engage more with young people. It's an area that really needs to be developed, I think. We obviously do school talks, and we have a schools programme in primary and secondary schools, but we are looking at what we can do to link more with universities and young people, and bring them in. So it's every week I kind of say there's a list of things that I want to do, and I just keep adding to it. But that's okay. That makes the work exciting as well, that there's always going to be something. I hope that answers it, Liam. I'm not sure, did I answer a question?
No, for sure.
That ever-growing list sounds very familiar, Niamh. We were talking just before you came on the podcast about HAI's own podcast. I wonder if you could just tell us a bit about that and your experience. Obviously Leon and I are new this year to the world of podcasting. What's been HAI's experience?
Yeah, so, well, it's actually kind of interesting because we're fairly new to it ourselves. The organisation had a podcast going back a number of years, and it's kind of all there. The archives are all there. It was all up on our website, and we were looking at, some really interesting interviews with amazing people. And I'm not sure. I couldn't say what happened or why it went. It just kind of seemed to stop doing it for a while. So we were looking into it recently, and on the back, I think, of actually seeing Humanist International do a podcast and conversations in the team. A lot of us are, the 3 of us that work in the organisation, we're all mums to young children, and a lot of our time is running between things, or you're in the car, you're doing different things, and we all were saying, actually, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I do, and now I kind of. And I'm not listening to anything necessarily very highbrow. I like comedy podcasts. I like something that switches off, which is, I make no apologies for it. But I think there's so much these days that you can, you just have more time with podcasts, because you can stop it and you can come back to it, or you can have it on in your earphones. You've so many options. So we kind of thought, right, well, let's restart. So we had plans to relaunch on International Humanist Day, World Humanist Day, but we actually didn't have it ready in time, but that's fine. Things happen. So we only relaunched it last week. And we're delighted just to kind of have it as something else for people to listen to. And it will be, I think, we want to talk with people about humanism, but much like some of our other events, we also want to bring other voices onto it. So it doesn't necessarily always have to be someone who might identify as a humanist or even have any affinity to humanism either. I think, different points of view are also really interesting, because, we work with representatives of all of the different faith groups in Ireland, and actually sometimes the different perspectives are really good as well. So I think that's something that we'd like to do as well. We'd like to push it a little bit beyond just being about humanism, even though it is Humanism Ireland podcast. But I do think it's important to get different voices and representation for people as well, because sometimes as well, by us doing that, it may show people that it's okay for us to be part of conversations that maybe humanism hasn't been included in the past as well. And we really like to see that too. You know, at the end of the day, we all have to work together. Might not always all agree on things, but we still all have to work together, you know.
I really like that, Niamh. And I think just, I mean, I know our producer, James, is a big fan of just the existence of more humanist podcasts, of more, you know, people talking to each other like this. And you know, there are certain political cleavages or worldviews that are very good at getting out there. And I think humanism has probably historically been a bit shy for different reasons of kind of, like you say, pushing out and reaching out to other faith groups and to other people. I think that's extremely valuable, and particularly in the podcast space. As we're sort of kind of coming to time here, Niamh, I was just going to ask whether there's anything else you'd like to share with our audience, any sort of messages for our kind of global listenership.
Well, I mean, obviously, you know, if anyone is coming to Ireland, you know, look us up, let us know. We're lucky. We have people from time to time when they're traveling, you know, particularly American humanists who will make contact with us and let us know that they're coming to Ireland and they'd like to meet up with some of our humanist groups. So I think that's really nice that we're able to have that kind of community where people, you know, are coming over. I know we had, and now I'm probably going to pronounce her name wrong, but we had Skeevy Hutchinson recently from America, and she's actually also interviewed on our podcast. So she had contacted us to say she was going to be in Ireland. So we always say to people, you know, the land of 1,000 welcomes, you know, but I mean, obviously, you know, people who might be listening to this in other parts of the world, you know, have a look at our website in terms of the work that we're trying to do. We try and keep it as updated as we can. And, you know, people are members of other humanist organizations, but they're, you know, please, you know, they can join up as a subscriber just to even get our quarterly newsletter and information about things that we're doing here in Ireland, and even just for other organisations. And I know Gary has mentioned EHSN. Well, it's similar to, you know, organisations around the world. If there's any humanist organisation, you know, that maybe not as further along as we are in terms of having, you know, legal humanist marriages or anything like that, if we can help anybody, you know, we've done a lot of resources, a lot of documents that we had to do over the years, and you know, we're always willing to help anybody with any of the campaigning that they may be doing. I think the Humanist Network is really, really good for that, and I'd love to see, you know, it'd be great to see that kind of maybe established a little bit more outside of Europe as well. There's another thing for your to-do list, Gary. I'm just giving you loads of things here now. Sorry.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much, Niamh.
No, ambition is good. Thanks very much, Niamh. That's been good to chat to you.
Thank you guys so much.
If you found this episode useful, please share it with others, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and leave us a rating and a 5-star review. It makes a big difference in helping new listeners find the show. If there's a topic you'd like us to cover or someone you'd like to suggest as a guest, you can contact us via the links in the show notes. To find out more or join Humanists International, visit humanists.international and subscribe to our newsletter. Thank you to our producer James and the team at Humanised Live, and of course the team at Humanists International, without whom we'd have very little to talk about. Thank you for listening to this episode of Freedom of Thought.